Back then, the world was tired. The guns had been firing for 6 long years, and the skies of Europe had finally gone quiet. But out in the Pacific, the fire still raged. The summer of 1945 was heavy, humid, and full of whispers. Whispers of an invasion, whispers of an ending. And in the hearts of young men scattered across those islands, a single thought echoed: when will it finally be over? The Pacific in flames. By July, American forces had clawed their way across the Pacific, island by island, coral by coral. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, from the bloody sands of Saipan to the burning hills of Okinawa, the cost had been unimaginable. More than 12,000 Americans lay dead on Okinawa alone, and over 100,000 Japanese soldiers had perished defending it, along with tens of thousands of civilians caught in the crossfire. The Japanese called it Gyokusai, the honorable death. The Americans called it hell. President Harry Truman, who had only recently taken office after Roosevelt's passing, received daily reports, each one grimmer than the last. Intelligence estimated that invading Japan itself could cost over 1 million Allied lives. And so, in secret meetings deep within Washington's guarded rooms, another plan began to take shape. Something that had been whispered about for years among physicists and generals alike. Something born from science, but destined to end in fire. The Manhattan Project. It had started in fear. In 1939, Einstein's letter warned that Germany might be developing a bomb unlike any other, a bomb powered by the atom itself. By 1942, America's Manhattan Project was underway. A hidden army of 130,000 scientists, engineers, and workers scattered across secret sites in Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, and Hanford. Behind barbed wire and under guard, they toiled in silence, building something that even they could barely comprehend. Uranium. Plutonium, the elements of creation and destruction. General Leslie Groves, the hard-nosed commander of the project, once said, "This is the most secret thing in the world." And in a way, it was. Even Vice President Truman hadn't known about it until he became president. July 16th, 1945. The desert lights up. In the early morning darkness of the New Mexico desert, scientists gathered nervously near a structure they called the Gadget. At 5:29 a.m., the world changed forever. A blinding light, brighter than 20 suns, tore across the desert, turning night into day. The ground shook. Sand fused into glass. Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, watching through protective goggles, whispered words from the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. The explosion left an enormous mushroom cloud rising over the Jornada del Muerto, the journey of the dead man. And as the shockwave rolled out, so too did a realization. Mankind had unlocked the power to end itself. In Washington. When news of the successful test reached President Truman, who was attending the Potsdam Conference in Germany, he leaned back, eyes narrowing. He had just met with Stalin and Churchill planning the future of Europe. Now his advisors told him the war in the Pacific could end without invasion. He scribbled in his diary that night, "I have discovered the most terrible bomb in the history of the world. It may be the fire destruction prophesied in the Euphrates Valley era, after Noah and his fabulous ark." But the question remained, where would they use it? Japan, a nation under siege. While Truman weighed his options, Japan was collapsing. Tokyo had been reduced to ashes, 100,000 dead in a single night from the firebombing of March 1945. Railways lay twisted, cities flattened, and factories silent. Yet the Imperial Army refused to surrender. Even as rice fields dried and children starved, leaflets from American bombers fluttered down from the sky, warning civilians to evacuate before the next attack. Inside underground bunkers, Japan's Supreme War Council argued bitterly. Foreign Minister Togo Shigenori begged for peace. War Minister Anami Korichika, eyes cold and unwavering, declared that Japan must fight to the end, to defend the emperor's honor. It was not a question of victory anymore, but of pride and survival. On August 6, 1945, as dawn touched the city of Hiroshima, no one knew what was coming. Children walked to school, fishermen pushed their boats into the bay, mothers swept wooden porches, and in the pale blue sky above, the sound of a single aircraft echoed faintly. A sound so ordinary, so common after months of war, that few even looked up. It was 8:15 a.m. The plane's name was Enola Gay. August 6, 1945. A Monday morning. The sun had just begun to rise over the rooftops of Hiroshima, glinting off the Ota River that wound lazily through the heart of the city. From the air, Hiroshima looked peaceful, almost untouched by war. It was one of the few Japanese cities still standing, a fact that puzzled some of its citizens. "Why haven't the Americans bombed us yet?" they'd ask each other in hushed tones. No one knew the answer was about to come from 30,000 feet above. The Enola Gay. At 2:45 a.m., from a small island called Tinian in the Pacific, a silver B-29 superfortress began to roll down the runway. Its pilot, Colonel Paul Tibbets, had named it after his mother, Enola Gay. Inside the bomb bay rested something never before used in war, a uranium-based weapon known as Little Boy. It weighed merely 9,700 pounds, longer than a torpedo, and held the power of over 15 tons of TNT. As the plane climbed into the darkness, Tibbets turned to his crew. He said quietly, "We're carrying the most powerful weapon ever made. God help us all." The long flight across the Pacific was silent. No flak, no fighters, no radio chatter. Only the steady hum of engines and the soft ticking of the bomb's monitoring equipment. At 7:09 a.m., radar detected Hiroshima ahead. Weather reports said it was clear. Tibbets gave the order, "We'll proceed with primary target." 3 smaller planes, the Great Artiste, Necessary Evil, and Enola Gay, formed up for the final approach. The city below. Down below, life went on as usual. Children gathered in schoolyards for morning roll call. Streetcars rattled along narrow bridges. Workers bicycled to factories, unaware of the silver speck glinting high above. At 8:09 a.m., air raid sirens briefly sounded, but when only 3 aircraft were spotted, authorities declared it a reconnaissance mission. The all-clear sounded. People stepped back into the sunlight. Slowly, the bomb bay doors open. Inside Enola Gay, Bombardier Major Therapy adjusted his Norden bomb sight. The crosshairs drifted across the city's T-shaped Aoi Bridge, the aiming point. The bridge shimmered like a silver thread below. At 8:17 a.m., he pressed the release. A metallic thud echoed through the fuselage. Little Boy dropped silently through the morning air. It took 43 seconds to fall. Then a blinding white flash tore across the city. The flash. At that instant, every shadow became permanent. Within a fraction of a second, temperatures at the epicenter reached over 5,000 degrees Celsius, hotter than the surface of the sun. People standing in the streets simply vanished. Their bodies turned to vapor, their outlines seared into stone steps and walls. Wooden houses exploded into flame, roof tiles melted, rivers boiled. A pressure wave followed, moving faster than sound, flattening buildings, shattering windows 10 miles away. The Enola Gay, 15 miles away by then, rocked violently as the shock wave hit. Co-pilot Robert Lewis looked back and whispered, "My God, what have we done?" Ground Zero. At the heart of the city, everything within a 2-kilometer radius was annihilated. The Shima Surgical Clinic, directly below the detonation point, ceased to exist. The Honkawa Elementary School burned to rubble. Children who had been lining up for attendance were caught in the open. Survivor Keiko Ogura, only 8 years old, remembered. A flash, like the sun, exploded. I was thrown to the ground. When I looked up, the sky was red, and people were walking without skin. Her voice broke years later when she said, "Some were holding their own eyes. Some had hair burning like candles." Another survivor, Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, staggered through the ruins to his hospital. He wrote in his diary, "The smell of burning flesh and wood mixed into one. People wandered like ghosts, silent, expressionless. Some called for water and fell before they could drink." The firestorm. Fires spread in every direction, joining into a massive inferno that consumed what little was left. The city's rivers became the only escape. Thousands jumped in, only to boil alive. Ash and soot turned daylight to darkness. It began to rain, black rain, thick with radioactive dust and debris. The survivors who could still move dragged others into cellars and ruins, searching for loved ones. A mother carried her child, whispering his name again and again. "Akira, Akira." But the child was silent. That day, over 70,000 people died instantly. By the end of 1945, radiation and injuries would raise the death toll to 140,000. When word of the successful strike reached President Truman aboard the cruiser Augusta, he addressed the world. His message crackled over radio stations that night. 16 hours ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima, an important Japanese army base. That bomb had more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the likes of which has never been seen on this earth. Crowds across America cheered. Newspapers blared, "Atomic bomb ends war." Few understood what that really meant. Few could imagine what Hiroshima had become. A silent plain of ashes, where shadows were burned into walls and prayers into the wind. In Japan, when news reached Tokyo, the Imperial General Headquarters fell into stunned silence. Some refused to believe it was a single bomb. Others insisted it must be a trick, perhaps a massive raid. But soon, reconnaissance flights confirmed what had once been a bustling city was now gone. Even then, surrender did not come. The War Council met again. War Minister Anami declared, "One bomb cannot decide our fate." He still believed Japan could force better terms by fighting on. So, while the embers of Hiroshima still smoldered, the American planes prepared again. 3 days later, August 9th, 1945, a second flash would light the sky, this time over Nagasaki, and with it, the world would finally bow its head. 3 days after Hiroshima vanished beneath a cloud of fire, another dawn broke over Japan. It was August 9th, 1945. The air hung heavy with disbelief and smoke. People whispered rumors. Some said Hiroshima had been destroyed by a new kind of bomb. Others called it divine punishment, or perhaps a curse. But no one could imagine that it would happen again. The second target. Originally, the Americans had planned to strike Kokura, a major arsenal city. But when B-29 Boxcar, commanded by Major Charles Sweeney, arrived over Kokura, thick clouds and smoke from a previous raid obscured the target. For nearly an hour, the plane circled, fuel running low. Then the crew turned toward their secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened. Inside, a weapon called Fat Man, a plutonium device, more complex and more powerful than the one that destroyed Hiroshima, began its 43-second fall. Then came the flash. The Valley of Fire. The explosion erupted above Nagasaki's Urakami Valley. The blast flattened everything within 2 miles. Steel bridges twisted, churches shattered, factories vaporized. The Urakami Cathedral, once the largest Christian church in Asia, was obliterated in an instant. Priests and nuns praying inside were gone, their rosaries later found fused together by the heat. Survivor Sumitero Taniguchi, a 16-year-old mail carrier, recalled, "My back was on fire. The skin peeled away like paper. I walked for hours before I found help." He would live, carrying those scars for the rest of his life, a living witness to the day the sun fell twice. By the time the smoke cleared, 40,000 lay dead and another 35,000 were dying. The Emperor speaks. In Tokyo, the unthinkable happened. For the first time in history, Emperor Hirohito broke the sacred silence and spoke directly to his people. On August 15, 1945, millions of Japanese crowded around crackling radios, listening in stunned quiet as his voice, soft, trembling, filled the air. The enemy has begun to employ a new and most cruel bomb. Should we continue to fight, it would result in the ultimate collapse of our nation. Therefore, we have decided to endure the unendurable and accept surrender." Tears fell freely, of sorrow, relief, shame, and disbelief. The war was over. Across the Pacific. When the news reached America, church bells rang. Sailors kissed nurses in Times Square. Families wept for those who'd never come home and prayed for those who finally would. But beneath the celebration, there was something else, something quieter, a question. Had humanity gone too far? President Truman, in private moments, would admit to feeling the weight of what he had unleashed. General Eisenhower, years later, said softly, "I could not bring myself to believe that dropping the bomb was necessary." Even Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, would confess to President Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, nothing grew for months. The survivors, the hibakusha, lived with pain, illness, and loss that words could not describe. Children were born with scars of the unseen radiation. But through the ashes, something remarkable began to bloom: hope. The people rebuilt. Hiroshima became a city of peace, Nagasaki a city of prayer. They built memorials not of vengeance, but of remembrance. Every August 6th and 9th, bells ring, not to reopen wounds, but to remind the world of what happens when hatred outweighs humanity. Today, it's hard to imagine the silence that followed. The world had changed forever. The atomic age had begun, an age of fear and fragile peace. But also an age of awakening. Because from that destruction came a lesson that echoes through every generation. Power without compassion is the greatest danger of all. And so, as we look back on that August morning of 1945, on the blinding light that ended one war and began another kind of fear, we must remember the human faces behind the history. The mothers, the children, the soldiers, the scientists, all caught in the tide of time. If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on the cost of war and the fragility of peace, then I invite you, from my heart, to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a like if you felt the weight of this story, and share it with someone who still believes that history should never be forgotten. Because the past still speaks. We only have to listen.